In shadows cast by a malevolent moon, a demon emerges, a harbinger of doom. From the depths of the abyss, he emerges unchained, a hellish figure, eternal pain. My man Zoro once said, "Scars on the back are a warrior's shame." I've been running away from making this video for 5 years now. I wanted to do it justice, and I knew that I wouldn't do it justice if I just churned it out, so I bided my time. I spent years working on this kind of sort of behind the scenes, or at least letting it marinate in my head, and you didn't click on this incredibly, unfathomably long and base video to hear me ramble in an intro, so definitely subscribe and let me know if you want more of this long form anime analysis, going the depths and lengths that I don't think anyone else would freaking go. In this video, we will be unraveling who Zoro is, from the themes of One Piece to the themes of what a swordsman means, and going through Zoro's entire character arc in artistic levels of detail, because I have said that Zoro is the deepest character in One Piece, and I will stand by that. Zoro is not only a fantastic character, but a damn near perfect fictional being. I am so inspired by him, and I will drive that inspiration into all of you. In the Sky Island arc, Zoro said, "To a god I'll never pray, but I say, no one understood Zoro until this day." Before getting into the themes of One Piece, and before getting into all the nuances and details of everything that this man actually did, we gotta kinda understand a little bit about who this guy actually is first. Zoro is a character that is renowned as an epic swordsman, mad lad, Giga Chad dude that bleeds the hell out in every single fight. This man does not come out of any fight unscathed. Oh my god, does this man take body shots. Man's been impaled so many times, he's either referred to as Julius Caesar or your average hentai girl. All right, this is definitely gonna be demonetized, but it's worth it because I will do it justice, god damn it. Zoro is renowned as the muscle of the group. He's the right hand of Monkey D. Luffy, the man who is going to become the next Pirate King. As the story adventures, Zoro's dream is to become the greatest swordsman of all time. And because of this incredibly basic and simplistic goal, the likes of which only a shonen protagonist can have, a lot of the community kind of likes to shit on him because they say Zoro is a relatively underdeveloped character. His backstory only got told to us once at the very beginning, with no real expanding it, no really having Zoro running around conquering his demons. He was a kid, he was in this dojo, he wanted to come in strong, there was a girl who was way more powerful than him, Zoro was like me and is terrified of women. I mean, Zoro constantly took L's from Kuina. Kuina eventually dies before Zoro can actually stick it into her, and he feels kind of bad, so he makes a promise on Kuina's freaking body, bro. He says, "I will become stronger for her until my name reaches heaven itself. I'll become stronger. I'll become the strongest swordsman in the world." And that basically launches his dream. He ends up joining Luffy's Straw Hat crew, and through his adventures, he just becomes incredibly, unfathomably strong. He doesn't come up with these epic strategies, he just kicks ass. If you look at most of the other Straw Hats, they all have that one breaking point moment. They have that one arc or whatever that tackles their backstory, and they have to somehow surpass themselves. They need to grow into a better version of themselves due to conquering the demons of their past. Whether it's Nami with Arlong, or it's Sanji in Whole Cake. Spanning throughout the story, every Straw Hat always has those arcs and those moments where they really need to overcome the demons of their past, and Zoro doesn't. A lot of people, because of this, like to say that Zoro is an incredibly one-note character throughout all of One Piece. He's just the muscle head of the group. His gag is that he's always getting lost. He's incredibly strong, it's true. He's badass, it's true. But as far as a character, this man gets way too much flack from everyone, which is the major inspiration for me going really deep into this video. Because almost as much as I love praising something that I genuinely adore, like Zoro from One Piece, I also like making fun of idiots who think that Zoro is a one-note character. In this video, I'm not only gonna recap the things that he's doing, no, I am going to recontextualize everything to fit the ultimate goal. I told you if I was gonna do this, I'm gonna goddamn do it right. And that ultimate goal is explaining to you how no one understands Zoro. Zoro is the peak of fiction. From the actions he takes to the way he thinks, Zoro is perfect. But now that we know who Zoro is, we have to understand what One Piece is really about. Every show, every story, every tale has themes to it. It has different messages that it's trying to get across that are very well interwoven into the tapestry of whatever fictional universe we might be discussing. Now, some shows are obviously just there to show you boobs, and I respect them tremendously, and the themes are rather shallow in some regard, and some shows are there to show you action, which is fan service the same way boobs are, just in a different way. One Piece themes are actually kind of fantastic throughout the entirety of the story, and anyone that actually watches One Piece or reads One Piece will concur on this front, so this isn't exactly a major argument that I need to have with the community or with everybody thinking, oh, One Piece is it's basic, it's freaking stupid. No one that actually watches One Piece thinks that way, and it's basically only going to be used and highlighted because as good as Zoro is in a vacuum, as I will express over the incredibly long video that you are about to watch, definitely keep watching, I need the ad revenue please, goddammit. But the character isn't only a character in a vacuum. The character is also a puzzle piece to the greater story that is unfurling. See, if you have a character that's brilliantly written but doesn't actually tie into the general themes of the story, well, in my opinion, not that does a great character make. That said, if you have a character that fits in really well to the themes of the story, but is kind of an ass-pull stupid character that none of us ever wanted to see in our life, not that does a great character make either. You need to really get those two slots. You need to have a character that's good and standing on their own 2 feet, but you also need a character that's integral and fits well in themes of the verse, which is why it needs to be briefly talked about right here. I'm actually talking quickly. You're looking at the length of this video and you're gonna be like, oh my God, Nux probably just stops halfway to scratch his balls. And that's not true. I've been scratching my balls since we've started. And also, I am covering things literally as quickly as I can while getting across all the points that I need to. So One Piece has a lot of themes to it. It is a very complicated story. More and more things keep getting touched upon and covered, and not every theme in the story is necessarily relatable to every single character in the story. As an incredibly simple example of that, the Whole Cake Island arc is an arc entirely focused on bonds beyond blood, which I think is one of the major themes of all of One Piece, and it is relevant to Zoro. But in Whole Cake, it's all about how it's not just about family. It's not just about family. You may have watched Fast and the Furious, but family ain't everything. It's the bonds you choose to make that is so much more important. And as you go through the Whole Cake arc, you see how Sanji is battling with his blood family and realizing that no, I don't care about how my blood family defines me. It's the family that I've chosen that matters so much more. His friends, the Straw Hats like Luffy. And that is beautifully in contrast with the actual villain of the arc, Big Mom, who is the mom, the literal family to every single person on Whole Cake Island in her entire crew, or 4 bajillion children. With the focuses on bonds and family being incredibly stressed, and how Big Mom only has a crew of family because who could you trust more than family? She creates bonds by marrying all the different people in all the different countries and shooting babies out faster than any woman in an NTR hentai. She thinks that these bonds are what's gonna keep her family close and what's gonna keep her crew close and keep them from betraying each other. Where you have someone like Katakuri who is purely only fighting because, well, they're technically family, and he starts to realize that no, the bonds that Luffy has, that he keeps standing up after getting clobbered, is so much stronger because when Katakuri gets knocked down once, he does not stand up again. The drive Luffy has to protect his found family is so much more powerful than Katakuri's bonds to protect his blood family. The entire arc is focused on that, and Zoro is not present in the arc. You see, Zoro's character arc in that entire bonds regard, that ended right in the beginning of the show. Zoro comes into the story introduced as this orphan kid who never actually had this family bond stuff going on, so therefore his character arc could not actually be developed in Whole Cake, which is why he's not present for the entire arc, and he's kind of doing stuff off screen in Wano that whole time. One Piece is an incredibly meticulously crafted story in that regard, that every time different themes and different arcs are captured, the Straw Hats that are most tied to those themes are the ones that have the biggest spotlight. It's actually genius. This man Oda, goddamn legend. So Whole Cake is mostly about characters like Luffy and Sanji, who the whole bonds beyond blood thing is a character development perspective that they both needed to actually go through here, because Luffy is the person that views people for who they are, not what their past makes them, and Sanji is someone who's been struggling forever about the tough bonds he's had with his family. It's just also beautiful, wrapped up, and perfect, but since it doesn't actually contribute to Zoro's story, Zoro is not there. Some characters fit much better with different themes. That's what I'm trying to say. I think one of the major themes in One Piece is politics in general. Stuff like freedom and anarchy versus authoritarianism. These are probably the main concepts in One Piece that they like to introduce. I think the Marineford arc was all about that. The two main antagonists being Akainu, a force of authority, versus Blackbeard being a force of anarchy. Those two main antagonists over there pull Luffy to both sides, who on the one hand definitely believes in justice, but on the other hand wants everyone to be free. And he is that middle ground between those two major forces, which is why it's very likely that authority versus anarchy will be the final battle of One Piece, not the point. But again, who wasn't present in the Marineford arc? Zoro. Zoro was totally off screen doing his own shenanigans at that point. He was not there. I think you're starting to see where I'm going with this. When Zoro is present in the story, those are the themes of One Piece that are going to be representative of him himself. You're not going to shove him into a story just because he happens to be there when the themes are completely irrelevant, and I just find that to be completely beautiful. So when it comes to political themes or themes of freedom, Zoro never had that issue. In arcs that focus on strength, in arcs that focus on growth, in arcs that focus about identity, those arcs are going to have major Zoro focuses because that kind of fits his bill exactly. Zoro is someone who's constantly trying to grow, someone who's constantly trying to overcome, and someone who finds his identity throughout the story of One Piece, and that is why those are the arcs that shape him the most. And there's another very prevalent theme in One Piece about racism and equality, and I'm not gonna be touching that with a 6-foot pole because Zoro kills way too many black people. Zoro keeps killing black people. I don't know, man. I'm sure it's a coincidence, but god damn it. All right, we've covered some basic One Piece themes. I was a little more in depth to the themes that don't necessarily apply to Zoro because those themes won't really be covered in this actual video because, again, this video is about Zoro, not technically One Piece. If you want the uber goober long One Piece video, you let me know. I'm here. I could do a Luffy one too. I freaking love that guy. All the Straw Hats are freaking amazing. But for now, we're getting into the fun stuff. We're still kind of in the foundational area of Zoro. I figured this video is gonna be long enough that I can take all the time that I like to really hammer home every point that I need to make because I'm never making this video again, never revamping it. No, this is your one-time shot. No one understands Zoro, and today you will because the next chapter, oh, it's even better. Just as a sword is the extension of a swordman, the swordman in turn is also an extension of the sword. Sun Tzu, The Art of War. Okay, I made it the fuck up, but it sounded sick, so I just kind of wanted to give it credibility. Anyway, we keep going. It's interesting that swords in general get such a high body count in One Piece. It's so interesting how many swordsmen and different types of swordsmen show up throughout the story. And of course, they all have to fight Zoro, obviously. This man's gonna become the goddamn best, so why not? But if you compare it to everything that goes on in the story, like, you know, transforming into magical beasts, or becoming different elements, or random giga powers that the devil fruits just decide to come up with. You have all these different crazy ways to fight, and swords get so much clout and screen time. I mean, there are freaking guns in this world, okay? Why swords? There's cannons, there's guns, spears, axes, lances, but swords have a very special place in One Piece. Swords are given so much respect, and that is because swords are more than just an object of killing. Swords in One Piece represent something far, far deeper. So we are gonna get into a little bit of the philosophy of swordsmen in general in the One Piece world before starting to talk about Zoro, because this is still part of that world building experience that you need to see how Zoro actually ties into everything. This will all be so goddamn worth it, especially because I'm gonna be going, again, as I've mentioned, in autistic detail. Zoro fights a lot of swordsmen, and you'll see how every single swordsman he fights sharpens himself for his future battles. Much how like when two swords clash to sharpen each other, so too Zoro grows from every single fight he has with a swordsman, not only physically becoming a stronger fighter, but also Zoro understands what it is to become more of a swordsman. A sword's not just the extension of the swordsman. The swordsman is an extension of the sword. And as Zoro is the right hand of Luffy, the king of the pirates, he is more than just a guy standing by his side to act as his muscle. He's not his advisor or anything like that. Zoro is Luffy's sword. So let's understand a little bit more about swords before we actually sharpen ours. Every swordsman character introduced in One Piece doesn't let you forget that they are a swordsman, except for one. And that is because being a swordsman in One Piece isn't just about wielding the sword, it's about the state of mind so much more. A swordsman in One Piece is a character proud of who they are. It's a character that has a very defined identity, whatever that identity might be, and it is something unwavering, unbending, and unyielding throughout any pressure that might impact them. When a sword wins a fight, the sword doesn't get credit for slaying his foe. The wielder of that sword gets that credit. Being a swordsman in One Piece, in short, equals humility. Now, I've chosen that word very carefully, and that's because I'm trying to get across a little bit more than just what humility means per se. If you look at the definition of humility, it's defined as a modest or low view of one's own importance or humbleness. And I don't think that's exactly what I'm trying to get across here per se. There's just no better word to define it. Humility in this context is not someone that views themselves as someone lowly. Humility is someone that recognizes exactly who he is and what his purpose is. Humility is someone that isn't necessarily grateful for what they themselves do or praising themselves for being badass. Someone humble recognizes that all their badassery, that was for a different purpose. That was for a higher power. That was for your captain. That was for God. God made you a great swordsman. Well, maybe being a great swordsman isn't just to your credit. Maybe it's your creator's credit. That's why I mentioned earlier how interesting it is that Zoro specifically said, "I'm sorry, I never pray to God," when he's referring to Enel in One Piece. And that's because if you notice Zoro's etymology throughout the series, he is constantly using terms like, "I'll become stronger for her until my name reaches heaven itself." And his obvious Ashura mode is representative of a demon. When he's fighting against Hachi in Arlong Park, he specifically says, "There is someone I must meet again, and until that day, not even death himself can take my life away." He is referring to these metaphysical concepts like they are something completely present in his conceivable reality. It's very interesting to look at it from this perspective because if you look at a word like humble or humility, which again isn't exactly defined that way, it's used in contexts trying to connote that. And a simple example to that is if you look in the Bible, Moses is referred to more humble than any man. Now, Moses knew he was freaking awesome. Moses didn't have a low appreciation of himself. He just realized that his purpose was for a higher power, so therefore he was defined as humble. Again, not exactly a great definition of the word, but it's the word I'm going to be using because I don't really have a better one for that context. And that's kind of what a swordsman is in One Piece. That's what a sword is in One Piece. When you see Mihawk floating around in his little freaking boat all by himself, kind of just vibing and living life, he has nothing to prove to anyone. He might be the strongest swordsman in the world, but he does not need to prove that fact to people. He's not fighting for his honor and dignity. He's just kind of vibing and doing his own thing, which is something so interesting for a major antagonist or someone that holds the title of greatest swordsman. When's the last time you've seen a show or an anime or an anything where someone was titled the GOAT? Right? They were titled the greatest blank, and they weren't proud of that title. They didn't necessarily gun for that title. They didn't constantly need to try to defend that title. It's only when you realize that you are a sword that you can truly become the greatest swordsman, but once you become the greatest swordsman, that's not even a title necessarily that you're proud of per se, because it's just your purpose at that given moment. This will become a lot more clear as I explain further in One Piece as Zoro grows throughout the series, because despite the fact that this is an 1,000 episode thing, Zoro grows for all of it. Most characters in a show this big have their little character arc at some point in the story and then they freaking stagnate. I'm looking at you, Frankie! I'm looking at you, Brooke! A lot of characters kind of just stagnate after that point where they have their big character moment. Yes, they grow in strength, they do cool things, but as a perspectival mindset, as someone that grows throughout from episode 1 to episode bajillion, that is incessantly impressive. It's another reason why Zoro is just absolutely peak and why he deserves a video of this caliber of depth. But before going on, as a final nail in the coffin of proof as kind of what I'm saying here about swords and the theme of what a sword is in One Piece, and I'm not even going to be getting into specifics of swordsmen themselves because I will be covering basically and virtually every swordsman throughout all of One Piece over the course of this video because they all clash swords with Zoro at some point and you get to see how his ideology grows from every single fight. But that's final sword topic that I'm going to be talking about is sword. You have a group in the military called Sword, a secret group of Marines that are operating on a level where they succeed and accomplish missions. They have missions to accomplish, they zip in there and they fucking do their shit. They are more efficient than a goddamn protagonist in an NTR hentai. Why is this the first thing? Why is this the analogy that I'm using? And here's the thing, they are a secret group. They don't get credit for their shit. They're not promoted in the regular ranks of the freaking Marines. They're not known as admirals and captains and vice admirals and all that shiz. They don't get glowing, outstanding credits on their record. They're the swift, unwavering hand of the military that goes without being seen. They accomplish things without getting credit because that is their purpose and it's what needs to be done. They are sword. They are precise. They are merely a weapon wielded by their master. They themselves have no pride. Now we're getting into Zoro's character on a much more personal level. Now that you've had all the build-up that you actually needed for this point of the video, we are very excited to announce here at Nux Taku Productions, there is only a little more build-up that you're gonna need for this video, and that is the cycle. When it comes to writing characters, every good story, their characters go through a basic cycle of growth. You know, they have their bunch of steps. Now, a lot of people would refer to it as the hero's journey. It's this little circle where the character kind of grows throughout. They start off as their little wet willy bitch boy, and they end up becoming absolute Giga Chad, based off myself. A story that's super uber long, it's incredibly difficult to have a regular hero's journey. Introducing the retcon. Woo, let's freaking go! And the best example for that is episodic type stories. Like if you look at Rick and Morty, Morty's development is incredibly slow, even though almost every single episode has a full hero's journey for Morty. And there's that little thing at the end of the episode that's like, oh, Morty actually learned nothing from all of this. And that's kind of what every episodic show does. If you have a show that goes for a long time, you can't just finish your character's character arc, then you're done. What are you gonna do with him for the next billion episodes? I'm looking at you, Frankie! But Zoro is different. You see, Zoro's hero's journey has many different layers of depth to it. Much like Dante's Inferno, where every level of Dante's Inferno needs its own hero's journey to complete to get to a level higher in your 9 circles of hell, Zoro follows a similar strategy. Zoro goes through the same cycle in every single one of these cycles, however, every cycle hits him on a level deeper than the previous one. The Zoro cycle is basically, he starts off with his identity, the way he actually views himself, the dream that he actually has, you know, whatever that dream might be, the actions that he takes in this cycle at that given moment, and finally, humility. He learns how to be a sword. Now, I decided to break it up into only 4 parts, even though you could definitely get into a lot of the nuances and different aspects, and not every arc exactly follows the same exact formula, but that's because these 4 parts are basically 4 of the major themes throughout all of One Piece that you keep seeing popping up time and time again, and that is why I feel like it's really important to highlight these 4 specifically. So I'm gonna quickly run down exactly what I mean here by going through every single arc and showing you exactly how he goes through these same 4 steps in every major setting. There are 4 major parts to One Piece so far. There's the East Blue arc, there's the Grand Line, there's the time skip, and there's the post-time skip. And there's also the backstory. Well, we'll count it as 5 parts, maybe even. And you'll see that Zoro kind of goes through these same 4 steps in every single one on a level deeper. That's peak character development, and I don't care what anyone actually has to say here. Especially because on a micro level, he goes through all 4 of these steps in every arc too! It's literally crazy. I'm literally getting chills right now. God damn. Zoro's identity when he was a child, he doesn't really know what he's doing with his life. His dream, eventually, is to surpass Kuina. The action that he takes in that arc is training to beat Kuina, managing to learn how to use 3 swords, and the humility hits him when he realizes he will never actually beat Kuina because of Kuina's eventual death. Falling down the stairs. Literally almost as tragic of a death as Madara's from Naruto. No, I take it back. Madara's death from Naruto is probably even more pathetic than Kuina's. I'm gonna say that. That's an official Nux quote now. You could throw it around. Get me canceled on Naruto Twitter. Now, I specifically like using these 4 as an example to discuss Zoro because identity, dream, and action, that's literally the basic makeup of every single Straw Hat character in One Piece. Every single one of them have that same trifecta of build-up, climaxing in the 4th step, which is their very personal character trait, that every single one of them have different. See, Zoro being the swordsman, being the sword of Luffy, the right hand of the king. Humility is his ultimate goal, and again, I'm using humility in the context that I discussed in the previous sword chapter. I'm just gonna be calling it humility from now on because there's no better way to define it. I've literally tried so hard. I could do a video in this style for every Straw Hat following, again, the trifecta of basic themes in One Piece being identity, dream, and action, and then, you know, the cherry on top, the big finale, which, like, let's say for Sanji would be bonds. For Luffy, it would be something like freedom, but for Zoro, it's being a sword. Now, I already covered the past to basic degree, referring to Zoro's past history and why it fits into Zoro's perfect cycle of character growth. How this man went from this little snot-nosed kid to someone with a dream that wants to become the greatest swordsman of all time. A swordsman literally so badass, he wants the heaven to know he is the freaking best swordsman of all time. What a goddamn inspirational little snot-nosed bastard he is. But there's something else that I think is very important to preface, because unlike every other backstory where the character is somewhat important in their backstory, Zoro's not. You see, I really love how Zoro came from nothing. A lot of people in Wano, myself sort of included until I kind of thought about it, were upset. A lot of people were just upset that Zoro didn't get some epic deep dive into his backstory. We're coming from Whole Cake, where Sanji, the basic rival of Zoro throughout the entire show, gets potentially some of the coolest character backstory retroactive development I've ever seen. The Whole Cake arc is an underrated gem in One Piece, in my opinion, and Sanji is a goddamn legend. But then, you know, Wano came along and we're like, all right, Sanji and Zoro, those are the two boys, the guys, the gamers. We just got Sanji deep dive. What's gonna happen with Zoro? Are we gonna learn about his secret Wano lineage? Is he gonna be a freaking mad lad? No, nothing happens. We don't talk about him at all. I mean, he does a lot of really cool things, and we'll be covering Wano in, 47 hours or however long it takes. But no, we never get deeper dives into Zoro's backstory. Zoro's backstory remains the most shallow backstory of literally every single character introduced. You have characters introduced as one-note side characters that are not even in the top 10 fighters of a villain of an arc, and that backstory will be better than Zoro's and harder hitting and much more deep and fantastic. Freaking Senor Pink from Dressrosa, his backstory spins circles around Zoro's in its levels of depth, complexity, and goddamn beauty. Why? Zoro's literally the second to main character in the whole show, the right hand of the king, gotta be the greatest swordsman in the world. And this man's backstory is, he was a kid and there was this girl that beat him up and he wanted to beat her up, but she fell down steps and died, and he was like, God damn it, I'm gonna be the GOAT. Yep, that sounds pretty freaking basic on paper, doesn't it? That's part of the beauty of what makes Zoro Zoro. I'm gonna go ahead and say that while yes, it was a very basic backstory and I would have loved to see it go deeper, it is kind of beautiful that Zoro is this character whose humility is his primal point here that he's trying to hone. Get it? Hone like a sword! Alright, so Zoro needing to craft his identity and learn how to become more humble throughout the show. And again, humble used in the way that I was referring to earlier. God damn it. You wanna know why I didn't make this video for the last 5 years? I was trying to find a better word than humble, god damn it. I was trying so hard. There isn't one. But the beauty of Zoro's backstory is that he came from nothing. He didn't need some epic backstory to put him on his journey. He didn't need some massive crazy betrayal and character growth in that fashion, or someone to push and prod him along, someone to force him to secretly go forward into his journey. I don't know, I feel like it's really nice that Zoro isn't actually a descendant of the legendary Darth Vader Wuhan clan, a clan so powerful that they all wielded Sharingans for generations. And now Zoro, he's secretly a descendant of the Kurta Sharingan clan. He's the final Uchiha, guys. Man literally is the last Jedi walking around, and he will finally claim his potential for his clan and family and lineage. I love that his lineage is, he's just a kid. He's just some dude. And how Oda reveals off screen in some Q&A, it's like, oh yeah, his dad's dad was like a Wano guy? Yeah, that's it. Which a lot of people were like really pissed about, that it's like, come on man, why didn't you give us more? This character has been integral to the story for thousands of chapters, he deserves it. No, he deserves not being the product of someone else. He deserves being his own person. And again, that fits into Zoro's identity really well. His entire character throughout the series is all about that self-control, self-grinding, become the greatest swordsman off his own merits. A character that will be the right hand of Luffy, the right hand of the king, the governing hand of the pirate world, because he is just a sword. He is a sword of this man, a weapon used for precise slicing, not because of who his clan is, but because of who he became. Sword from even the best metal out there will be dull if it's not honed. And even the greatest sword in the world, if it's wielded by a mediocre swordsman, is completely useless. That is again a theme that you will see throughout Zoro's growth, fighting other swordsmen throughout the series, and I absolutely adore the fact that Zoro's backstory is just the vehicle that placed him where he is right now, and nothing more than that. No secret gimmicks, no hijinks, no goddamn character bloodline traits, and it's not pulling any genjutsus out of his ass. He doesn't have a ton of metachlorians. He's just a guy being dude, being bro, and he will ratio the fuck out of everyone. Which, I mean, is technically his sword style. Kuina's like, oh my god, I have a sword, and Zoro's like, ha, ratio, I have 3! Alright, we're gonna move on to the next part. You will notice that throughout the East Blue Saga, Zoro also goes through the very same cycle of character development and growth that we have come to adore and appreciate so much from his backstory. Identity, dream, action, humility. It's the same 4 steps that he takes everywhere, but every single time, it gets even deeper. You will start to see that the identity that he has in every arc is just the humility that he's learnt in the previous arc. Literal chills. Goddamn brilliant writing. See, in Zoro's backstory, his identity was kind of irrelevant. He was a complete nobody that wasn't worthy of anything until he got inspired by Kuina, and he trained and he promised to become the GOAT and all that fun stuff. And you see, right now, his dream isn't to beat Kuina anymore. I mean, she fell down the stairs. She got Madara'd, as they say. See, currently, at the very beginning of the East Blue Saga, Zoro's out there tied to a post, Jesus style, because goddamn I will worship and lick the sweat off this man's voluptuous bosom. Better cut that out. I don't need people to hear about my one sword style when I refer to how beautiful this man is. His humility that he's learnt in the previous arc was that he made this promise. He said, I will become stronger for her until my name reaches the heaven itself. I will become stronger, the strongest swordsman in the world. That was his defining moment at the end of his backstory. And he has really incorporated that into his very identity. He is now Pirate Hunter Zoro, a wandering absolute badass mad lad. Vash the Stampede level motherfucker. Walking around taking down pirates, truly aiming to become the greatest swordsman in the world. And that's why his dream in this given arc is to become the GOAT. In this season, where from the East Blue Saga, the first stage of his cycle isn't looking at himself as a nothing. He is looking at himself as the lone badass swordsman with the dream of becoming the GOAT. So as you can already see, he has developed since his backstory, which is always nice. I love when there's like some sort of somewhat time skip type thing, that they're not just them, but bigger. But they actually somehow do develop their philosophy. Boruto just went through a time skip. The same cannot be said for them. Now Sarada looks like she streams Valorant, and that's basically the difference. They're also stronger, but ideology-wise, nothing happened. They're just more edgy. And that makes me sad. I feel like these years have gone by. You'd think their psyche would have grown, and for Zoro, it really did. He is now a badass swordsman. He no longer is a little nothing burger, and the badass swordsman is the dream of the previous one. God damn it, it just fits so nice. God damn it, it's just so beautiful the way it locks right in. So as we continue down this cycling road, Zoro gets asked to become part of Luffy's crew, and of course Zoro accepts after much Luffying around. And I will not lie to you, Zoro is incredibly badass from the get-go. He wears his cool bandana, he has these cool swords, he's fighting in a dynamic fighting style. At this point, we're not actually learning about his character growth per se. He recognizes that, yeah, I will become a worker of yours. At this point, Zoro is working for Luffy, kinda, on a very, very, very low level. The level of obligation. The level of paying up a debt. Luffy saved him from getting executed. He'll be Luffy's muscle. He is not Luffy's sword at this point. He is merely a completely separate entity paying up a debt due to obligation. You see, in this arc, I would not even call them friends. I think that they are only friends at the very end of the East Blue Saga, and I will get to that. That's our humility point, but don't worry, we have the action step first. As I've mentioned, the term sword is a very loosely used word throughout the entirety of One Piece, and you do technically fight people that are technically wielding swords in this arc, but none of them are actually referred to as swordsmen, because you'll notice throughout this saga, despite wielding swords, they don't have the ideology of what it is to be a swordsman. The sword is just a sharp stick that they have that they use to hurt people. It doesn't actually define who they are themselves. Even someone like Captain Kuro, who uses all those sharp little sword things at the end of his gloves, isn't actually referred to as any kind of swordsman. Zoro never regards him as a swordsman that he needs to overcome or beat. Zoro doesn't even fight the dude because, to be frank, he's not a swordsman. Those, again, they're just sharp sticks that he's waving around. Now, I know that people are gonna say, well, that's a weird point, Nux. They're not swords, they're just sharp pokey things from his... Listen, the term sword is so loose. Das Bones, okay? God damn it, from Crocodile's Mr. One is called a swordsman who doesn't use a sword. He just make parts of his body pointy, and he's still referred to as a swordsman, so you can sit your little hiney down, please. It's clearly an ideology so much more than it is a weapon. And that's all well and good, because that is all a prelude to the actual first swordsman this man faces, Dracul Mihawk. Power ceilings are a very interesting topic in general when it comes to shonen anime. You have a long-running story, very often you like to introduce a character that's going to be like one of the big guys at the end of the verse, that is going to be some sort of peak power level, a ceiling that you're going to have to reach that you will never actually break through until the very end. And One Piece does a really good job with that, introducing Mihawk in the very beginning as this power ceiling, but also very much concealing exactly what the Luffy power ceiling is going to be. You can have the strongest swordsman power ceiling that you know exists at some point, but Luffy is not actually bumping into the power ceiling of his verse until Marineford, which I think is a really nice way, because you see Luffy's goals are so different than Zoro's. Zoro learned something so good in this arc. The Baratie is such a good way to get Zoro this big moment, because Luffy's dream is to become the king of the pirates at this point. Again, we could go through the same cycle for Luffy, and we are not doing that today. We may be in a future video, because Moist Critical, my Charlie said like Luffy, and then someone has to set that record straight. I'm literally shaking, crying, seething, and coming and pissing right now. But you see, Luffy's goal at this point in the story, his dream is to become the king of the pirates, and Zoro's is to become the strongest swordsman in the world. I'm sure you're already noticing a very big difference as to why both of their characters needed to develop in different fashions and have different climactic high points in the story. That is because Zoro's direct contrast to his dream of becoming the strongest swordsman in the world is bumping into the strongest swordsman in the world, whereas a dream like Luffy's, becoming king of the pirates, his job is not actually to bump into the strongest pirate in the world, which definitely doesn't exactly contradict his dream. Yes, there is a correlation between becoming the strongest pirate and being the king of the pirates, but that's not exactly the causation here. I mean, look at Buggy. Buggy's a goddamn emperor, and he fucking sucks. Which, again, was something I predicted. Let me remind you that I called that, and I was right, and the community laughed at me, and they said I didn't know anything, but then it turns out I was right, and then every single one of them sucked my dick in sequence. Like, they went in order, then I inserted the dragon, and all right, let's not get into the nitty-gritty of the details, but you should know it all happened. It all went down exactly like that. Now, if you get into the action phase of the cycle and you look at what Zoro does in this saga, for the most part, Zoro's just doing his job. As I mentioned, he's repaying a debt. He views it as an obligation. Luffy is not yet a friend, per se. He's just kind of doing the right thing because he's an incredibly honorable, badass, beautiful, and goddamn, that man has some tits. But if you look at the actions he takes throughout the given saga, most of it is just based on obligation, fighting the grunts, doing the things that he was supposed to be doing. And one thing that very much went against his obligations, one thing that I would say is not part of the job description and perhaps even hinders the job description. Man saw Mihawk and jumped to fight him. Now, some people could say that Zoro has his own dream, so therefore it is completely valid of him to do so. This man has a dream to become the greatest swordsman in the world, and he did not goddamn sacrifice that dream in order to work for Luffy. He could freaking go for both at the same time. But here's my incredibly privileged opinion. If you have a contract with someone, if you make a deal with someone, you uphold your end of the bargain. And if something personal that, yes, you could definitely proceed to pursue, if something personal comes in the way of you upholding your end of the bargain, you goddamn cannot do that. That is the borderline equivalent of breaking your word. So Zoro going to fight Mihawk purely based on emotions and wanting to reach that zenith, despite knowing that it was a fight he couldn't really win, he takes an L as the right hand of the future king, and he takes an L in the actual fight itself. And I like that. And Zoro recognizes that. You see, every character grows through failure. Everyone in life grows through failure. It's a character's flaws that make them relatable, not a character's perfections, and I think that makes Zoro so much stronger for future arcs when he clearly does overcome this impulse. So, in the action phase of this very arc, in this saga, he doesn't exactly do the most fantastic of jobs, and in turn, he enters the humility phase of his cycle, where he then, after losing his fight, in a spectacular fashion that I will cover in slightly more detail in just a minute, he then gives his sword to Luffy, and he promises Luffy that he will never lose a fight again. I think this is one of the most powerful scenes in all of One Piece, not only because of how awesome the Mihawk interaction actually was that got you to see the power level of the world, but also in regards to Zoro's basic understanding of humanity and what he needs to go further. He understands his identity so much better right now than he did at the very beginning. He has reached a new state of humility, knowing his job here, knowing what he's undertaken, and Luffy accepts his sword, picks him back up, and they continue to venture off. I believe at this point they have managed to become friends. They are more than just colleagues, and this is more than repaying a debt. Zoro identifies at this point as Luffy's right hand, and when he promises him that he will never lose a fight again, I think it's twofold. On the one hand, the man, he's an absolute mad lad, all right? He's freaking awesome, and to be fair, man does not lose a lot of fights. Yeah, he gets injured in all of them, but he doesn't lose any of them. Man is such a Giga Chad. Holy crap, man made a promise and freaking kept it. His word is his bond, brother. Man doesn't take L's. He just like me, for real, for real. So yes, this is like ultimate manifestation, and manifestation is another incredible thing that Zoro does throughout. As I mentioned, he does a lot of really cool stuff, talking about how not even death himself can take me away. His name will be renowned as a swordsman in heaven itself. I never pray to God, you know, fun stuff like that. And then he literally unlocks Ashura mode, which goddamn, I don't know how he freaking did it. Man's manifestation abilities are something. But as you can see, he keeps his promise. He doesn't lose fights as the series goes on. I know that it almost sounds ridiculous if you think about it, because yes, there are some opponents he doesn't beat, but he doesn't lose any fights! And there are some technical losses, I guess Kuma teleporting him away in Sabati Archipelago, or him getting stuck in wax in Little Garden and like little stuff like that. But when it comes to actual head-to-head fights, man doesn't lose any of them, which is terrifying and kind of incredible at the same time. On the one hand, you could say that it's kind of annoying when you have a character that, you know he'll never lose his fights, but on the other hand, he's not One Punch Man. He could definitely lose. He is vulnerable to being defeated. There are opponents a lot stronger than him, but he only wins his fights. Not that he only enters fights that he knows he could win either, because most of his fights he's going in as the underdog and manages to surpass even himself to win a fight. As we will mention, going forward, we're still in the very beginning here, but even more than that, Zoro's promise rings true based on a mistake that he just made. When he went to fight Mihawk, he really entered a fight he could not win. And as a right hand of the future King of the Pirates, he cannot afford being amputated at this point in Luffy's journey. He is putting something above himself. And that is why I would really say that this is a ultimate state of humanity and humility that he has managed to attain here. He recognizes that his future is not his own anymore. There is someone that takes him out of being the lone wolf. Now, again, if you've noticed, the way I've identified him in the very beginning of the East Blue Saga was as that lone wolf character. That was his identity at that point, but right now, his identity is so much more. Right now, his humility has brought him to a state through his promise to Luffy that he is reaching this level of, I am your swordsman. I am the right hand of the future King of the Pirates, which is epic because, as I've mentioned, it always leads into the next saga, and the next major saga on the Grand Line, you will see that Zoro's identity has evolved from being the lone wolf, badass swordsman wandering character to right hand of the king. A little spoiler for the next chapter of this video, but that is not seen anywhere better than him telling Luffy that Luffy should not be going to apologize to Usopp because Usopp was a goddamn bitch in Water 7, which I will again cover in more detail, but it's beautiful how his character develops in every stage. He has his identity stage, and then the humility stage where he grows, and then the identity stage of the next saga is his humility stage from the previous saga. It's just the most classic and beautiful character growth you can possibly fathomably see. Getting slightly deeper into his actual fight with Mihawk, you learn so much about these swords clashing. Because as I've mentioned, swordsmen in One Piece are a very different breed than everyone else. Swordsmen don't only view their swords as an extension of them, but they view themselves as an extension of their sword. Mihawk's sword is a sword that slices through anything. Mihawk's expressionless power, his stoic gaze, and his unflinching attitude are exactly who he is as a person and as a swordsman. Mihawk knows exactly who he is. I would say that Mihawk, the greatest swordsman out there, has reached the stage of humility that Zoro spends the entire series trying to hone. You see, not all humble guys created equal. Humility, as I am defining it, is reaching a state where you recognize that it's not all about yourself. Understanding your purpose and putting that ahead of your feelings is just the most important and prominent thing that any swordsman needs to do. Because if a swordsman truly is his sword, a sword merely acts as an extension of its wielder. It does not need to take credit for the accomplishments of who the sword slices. A sword merely is. And that's kind of exactly what Mihawk exemplifies in this very first interaction. The fact that Mihawk came here and showed up out of nowhere in the Baratier arc and wiped out a ship with 3,000 men on it just because it was in his way, that exemplifies exactly what I'm trying to get across. Mihawk is this dude floating around in his little goddamn boat, and this was just in his way. He's not gonna go around it because he wants to go straight, and he just slices it in half because why the fuck not? Mihawk is a character that knows exactly who he is, and he is unflinching in his regard to who he is and his power difference versus his opponents. He has respect for Zoro when Zoro isn't willing to turn around, when he slices Zoro in the front instead of on the back, because scars on the back are a swordsman's shame. Goddamn, did that line hit me so hard when I was a kid. At that moment, despite the overwhelming power difference, despite knowing that Zoro was but a baby compared to this man's level of prestige and power, he knew and saw in that moment that Zoro had a future. So of course, he didn't give Zoro a lethal blow. Yeah, he goddamn hurt this shithole because freaking Zoro went up to fight the greatest swordsman in the world. He's not just gonna give you a little slap across the face and then you no! This man is gonna make you earn your next fight. And that is surviving this one. And that is why Mihawk was all too eager to take Zoro as an apprentice in the future. He saw a future in Zoro by Zoro's unflinching attitude, by Zoro's ability at the very, very climax of their fight finally to truly be a sword. So I love that Zoro's first major fight in the series is against Mihawk, because yes, he loses, and yes, it has that awesome promise sequence right after that where he promises Luffy he will never lose another fight. But what's so much more powerful is that you really learn who a swordsman really is supposed to be and how they are supposed to regard themselves from the very, very beginning. The first swordsman Zoro fights gives us the baseline of what a swordsman and what a sword really is. To understand how Zoro's grown from this before getting into the next saga right now, because there is a little more to be said here, I absolutely love when Zoro is fighting Hachi, like an absolute Giga Chad, fighting in a state where he should be dead. He says, "There is someone I must meet again, and until that day, not even death himself can take my life away." Which, yes, is incredibly badass. This man literally at the verge of death, still bodying his opponents. But also, I love that his drive at this given moment, yes, he has to fight because he is Luffy's right hand, but also there is a lot of himself in there too. A lot of, I can't die until I actually accomplish my dreams. So you'd think that the answer would be recuperate. Why is he fighting? He should be freaking in bed. Man literally got his chest hole opened. Mihawk put his entire cock and balls into Zoro's chest cavity, and Zoro right now is wandering, still fighting. Why? Man literally said someone he has to meet again. So why is he fighting? And that is because there is something more important at this given moment than him becoming the greatest swordsman of all time. And that is kind of the humility level that he's just attained. That is recognizing that first and foremost, I am the hand of the king. Because that's what a sword really is. And right now, his dreams come second, which is just so beautiful. His dreams aren't worthless, they're not nothing. But ultimately, with every step he takes, Zoro is becoming more of a sword. Also then, Arlong sees him and he's like holding him up by his head, and Arlong looks at the scars on his body, and Arlong's like, Jesus, holy fucking dolphin Christ. This man should not be alive right now. Which is just a really cool statement to let you know exactly the level of resolve Zoro actually has at this point in the story. And it only gets better and bigger and greater throughout. It shakes Arlong to his core. This is Arlong, the racist asshole that looks at humans as lower creature. Oh my God, Zoro killed a non-human. You know what, a racist asshole. We'll talk about racist Zoro in the future. But for now, Arlong, the guy that looks down on humans, looks at Zoro in absolute reverence at the level of resolve that this man actually has. But ladies and gentlemen, this is just the beginning.